right, so before we dive into estimation, I want to talk about what's going on in games and game dev right now.
We're recording late May 2024. Um, Certainly, there's still a lot of layoffs happening. I think there was a big
Yeah.
question in everyone's mind about when and if that was going to cool down. I think
Mm,
we're past people's most conservative estimates at this point. Like it seems to be never ending. Um,
yeah.
there's no sign that it's going to slow down at this juncture that I can see.
Yeah.
So that's creating a lot of pain for a lot of people. And that's also certainly constricted the job market as well. Like I'm seeing people for the first time, I'm hearing about talented people that I know who are having a harder time landing new roles
Yeah.
than like I like in last year, it didn't seem like it was really affecting top tier talent. For the most part, it was
Yeah.
mostly just like, big swaths of like relatively junior people. Like, and I'm talking about in the beginning when this all first started, and like, a lot of it was in the mobile space specifically and things
Yep.
like that. And now it seems like nobody's safe anymore. So
Yeah.
that's layoffs.
There's something in there too where I've been asking some people, like, can you give me the deeper picture of what's going, like, I'm just curious what people's thoughts are around this now, because at first I kind of was like, okay, it's layoffs and kind of people are jumping on the bandwagon because if everybody's doing layoffs, it's okay to do layoffs. So if you thought you might have to do layoffs, now's the time because you don't stand out, right? If you wait 2 years and no one's doing layoffs, then you do a big layoff, you look like a jerk. Right now, it's just part of the industry and you can kind of get away with it. And I think that there's some of that in there, as well as, the all the stuff we talk about, that, shareholder value and people not, ROI, how we're not getting that. We need to increase Q2 profits or whatever, like all this different stuff, right? And yet when I look at it right now, I'm honestly going like, I don't think those answers sufficiently explain what's going on. And I've started to get super curious. I've started to just be like, okay, what in the world is happening right now? And again, I wish for our listeners, I was just like, it's this, but I am honestly, I'm at a loss in terms of explanatory power for this. It's just like, it just seems like it's more than those things would need right now. And so,
Well, I think we tend to make the mistake of assuming, well, first off, it's a very complex issue that you can look at from
yeah,
multiple angles, right?
absolutely.
And it's not just in the games industry right now that some of these trends are occurring. I think another thing is, um, it's easy to boil it down to an emotional. Like I think a lot of people boil it down very emotionally, and they'll say, either the economy is really bad right now, and so a lot of people are just losing their jobs, and that's really sad. And then other people will say this is sort of like an outrage, that the capitalist system is sort of stomping on the everyman, and that's just a couple of the very emotional perspectives. Like I think we're in a weird economic trend shift right now. I mean, like, there's 30% less cereal in a box of cereal. There's like we were just, my girlfriend and I were just looking at our paper towel rolls in the last like month or two, and we're like, something's off here. We're going through these things twice as quickly as we used to, and they're like disintegrating in our hands and stuff, and like something's off, and they've raised the prices, and it's because these companies are dealing with inflation by lowering the amount of material that they sell you and increasing the prices and lowering the quality of that material. So they're just doing everything they can. And to me, what I see there is like, regardless of what you think about this, corporations' profit margins are thinning and thinning and thinning due to inflation, due to lowered consumer spending, due to all these things. And this is happening in video games as well. For sure. Like as far as I've seen, the trends are showing that like less people are buying video games this year
Mm,
than the previous years. And so it's like, what do companies do? I think what people don't understand is like the the line in the sand for companies is not, are we in the red or are we in the black? Like they have
Right.
to your point, Ben, they have to be enough in the black to justify their shareholders' investments. So they need to be making other people money. That's how corporations think. And so it's not, oh crap, we're not making any money or we're in red or we're going to go bankrupt. Like long before that, they're going to start making very, very shrewd financial decisions to avoid their margin shrinking at all. So they're going to
Yeah.
lay people off. They're going to cut expenditures. They're going to do all these things long before they end up in the red.
In 2020 and 2021 and a little bit of 2022, there was, and people have talked about this, but there was that sort of growth of um, remote work. There were higher salaries being asked for. People were hiring more people than they needed, I would argue. Um, and simultaneous to that, you had massive investment going into games, but technically into sort of narrow segments of games that didn't work out, like the example of the Web3 sort of craze, like billions and billions of dollars being funneled into game projects. And if you're outside of the system and you're going, well, where do I want to invest money? Well, one, investment is harder now because of the change in the interest rates. But two, when you look at game investments over the last several years, they don't look good. And I think part of it is because people were making bets based on unproven technology without a real use case in the space. But if you're outside of that, you don't know any of that context or nuance. You're just like, oh, it looks like game dev isn't a great place to invest in.
One of the things people don't understand about interest rates being low is it's not just that you get minimal return on traditional investments. It's that all of the higher risk stuff also gets driven down in its return because more people are piling into it. So if you have like high risk corporate bonds, the more people that are investing in that, the lower the interest rates go, right? The lower the returns go. So then what happens is more and more risk seeking behavior occurs. And I would actually argue that video games are a pretty high risk place to invest. And it makes the most sense to invest if you can put like 30 invest in 30 different groups or 40 different projects.
Right, right.
That's when the hit driven like nature of games can really have an outsized payoff, is if you have tons of irons in the fire. So I think like in a zero interest environment, there were a lot of people trying to play in that space. And so I think that and again, I don't blame any of these studios or these talented devs from getting in on that, because it's like, what a great opportunity, right? To really like get out there and try something interesting and innovative. But like, now I think the piper is being paid on a lot of these projects, and there's a realization that most of them are going to fail. And that's just kind of how it works. So,
all right, let's get on what we're talking about here. Man, this one's been coming up for me a lot. I started working on something around estimation recently, and I was writing a post today about it, and I realized like, wow, thinking about estimation for very long in game dev makes me angry. Like I get upset, and I'm not, you know me, I'm not that prone to being very upset, but just like even starting to talk about, okay, well, let me write something about this thing I've been working on. I just was like, dude, almost like, what is wrong with us around this? And it's not just games. It's in other aspects too. I think a lot of software dev struggles from this. The way I sort of headlined it is, I have asked groups of game devs in various environments at studios or in where game devs are, have you ever had a project, a game, anything, come in as you expected with all the features at the deadline? And the answer is always no. I've never had anybody say yes. It's always no. While this is true, and everybody acknowledges this is true, throughout our industry, there are studios all over the world that are doing planning right now. And there's somebody in that studio that somehow believes that this time, they've solved it. And they know how to plan a 2, 3, 5, heck, 12-month, but I was thinking more like 2, 3, 5-year project. And that it's all going to come in on time, under budget, at quality. And it's like, dude, are you watching what's happened? Why do you think this is going to... What is going on with your ability to look at everything that's happened in our and related industries for the last 20 years and just ignore it? and just be like, no, 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 but this time we've got it. And so we should definitely tell, again, the investors or whatever. And I know it's complicated. There's a lot of different stuff and whatnot. But that is such a frustration to me because it breaks how we think about estimation when we try to put it now.
Honestly, as I hear you talking about this, I'm like, I realize that it breaks how we think about everything. And there's a broader frustration here that I have that goes beyond estimation. Estimation is just a incredibly poignant example, I think, of where this really goes off the rails. Like, it's easy to deconstruct it. But we were just talking about this financial constriction that's happening in the games industry and how companies and employees are reacting to it. One of the things that I have been sad to observe and now report is that companies are reacting to that financial constriction, that like difficulty, with attempting to assert more control. Managers are attempting to assert more control. And unfortunately, what bothers me about this is I think that's going to produce even crappier results in the short to medium term. And I think that there's, false views like, well, if somebody is like an innovator or great with like socializing for their teams, they're like a connector, but they don't do as much work, or they're not as technical or whatever, like that's a person that's up on the chopping block to be laid off. Like, what we really need is boots on the ground. What we really need is getting stuff done. What we really need is people filling out their Jira tickets. What we really need is managers like keeping on top of things and making sure people are doing things. And like all this stuff I've seen, like it's already bad. It's always bad in corporate America, but it's gotten worse now that the people perceive that the fire is being turned up under their butts. And so the reason I bring that up is because I feel like estimation is like the people's attitude towards estimation is based on a falsehood, which is, it's the same falsehood that's those other things are based on, which is more control equals better results. And so we use estimation as a way to get more control. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to a program manager, project manager, director of ops or whatever, who's just like, I need a roadmap. I need the plan. Like, I don't know what anyone's doing. Like, I don't even know if these people are more valuable than these people. Like, I need to know this stuff. I need a buttoned up process so I can say we're going to be done with this now or on this date. And I'm just like, okay, so there's what you're saying, and then there's what I hear. What I hear is anxiety because there's a lot of unknowns. What I hear is nervousness because you actually don't have a close enough relationship with any one of your staff to know who's working on critical path stuff and who's not, like who's adding more value or who's adding less value. Like, you don't know these things. So you want some system to shoot you data so that you can know those things and so that you can feel more comfortable with uncertainty. So that, I'm not saying management is bad. I'm not saying estimation is bad. I'm not saying project planning is bad. What I'm saying is that emotional impetus that leaders and managers often have to drive these systems so that they can feel more uncomfortable with uncertainty is the exact opposite of the way a leader should be showing up for their teams. And I guarantee it's also the opposite of the way that's best to work in a highly uncertain, highly innovative space to create compelling products for players. So and that's my problem with estimation. The way that we often see it is like, make me, I want to know the answer. Give me the answer. And it just sets the whole wrong, like you're already failing from the second you start the conversation.
And again, it becomes a blame game in a punishing world. It's an excuse for why things didn't happen the way we said they would. If I'm the senior person and I was the one who set the deadline and then said all this stuff has to get done, again, setting the team up for failure. But I, through the system I've built, basically forced them to give me a plan that did fit. Now I get to blame them. Well, they said they were going to get blah, blah, blah done. It's like, yeah, well, you didn't let them not say it. And on the flip side, when nothing got done, you can always point to those leaders, and regardless of how effective you actually were at delivering the most important thing at any given time and learning the most and all this different stuff, you can always point to those senior leaders and you can say, we would have had it, but they had unrealistic expectations. Which is the problem is, in all cases it's true, but we've sort of contrived to make it so that it's always the other person's fault, and the reality is it's all just a dysfunctional relationship with the idea of estimation and planning.
I think that a lie that game developers tell themselves is that if they can forward project with enough wisdom, experience, and technical know-how, they can get ahead of the gotchas that are going to come up during the product development process. And that is a lie. I don't care. You could be God's gift to game development, and until you can think you have everything perfect in your mind, but until you play test that thing, you do not know a damn thing. I promise that there's something about the way our brains work. There's something about the nature of innovation that it is that moment when the thing is on an environment and that we play test it and we start tinkering with it, the true learnings, the true realities come in about what's important or not. So back to Ben's point, it's not just that you're trying to do the most important things first. It is also acknowledging that you are going to end up not doing a bunch of things and ensuring that the things that you don't do are the things that matter the least. That's also the important part. And you cannot know that. It is not knowable until you see it and until you feel it. And so that is why we are such proponents of iterative development. And by the way, the reason it might feel like we're off topic right now, but we're trying to explain the thought process, the environment in which great estimation that is effective lives. Because in other words, your estimation will always be a failure and always feel annoying, and you'll always be cynical about it as long as the system in which it lives is busted.
You planned a game up front, top to bottom, because you have that perfect vision, like you said, that you have in your head. I can almost guarantee if everybody just followed that exactly, and everybody just built every little piece of it just the way you wanted, I can almost guarantee the game you produce is not going to be great. And in fact, I think it denies what draws so many of us to game development. Because it's not that you can hand me a giant, again, list of tickets of all the things and features and bits and pieces, and I can just start executing them. It's actually that when I see this thing start coming to life in play tests and when I start interacting with it, that I get to now use my judgment as a game developer, whatever type of game developer I am, to go, I could make this a little bit better. This would be a cool thing. What do you think about that? And you want to create a system that allows your devs to unleash that creativity. And I think, again, coming back to the idea of trust, some companies, some studios are terrified of that because they're like, no, then everybody's going to have a million ideas and we're never going to get everything done. It's again, like I said, you weren't going to get everything done anyway. But two, some of those ideas might be really good. Do you have a mechanism for filtering out which ones are actually worth prioritizing and which aren't? And that's the reality, is you don't. And so you just default to I don't want to know any of that. And you end up producing then a worse game. And you have all these really wonderful game developers who you're not actually allowing to be creative in what should be one of the more creative spaces of broadly software development that exists today. I also want to call out one other thing because, again, you was we're off topic. We're talking about prioritization, not estimation. I want to hit this because I believe that estimation has a purpose, and one of the primary purposes of estimation is to help us prioritize, even though the estimates are wrong. When I'm prioritizing stuff, it is useful to know, even roughly, how long something's going to take, because it may not matter. Maybe this is just a core component of the experience we're trying to create. Unless if you tell me it's going to take 10 years just to build that one thing, look, we're going to be building it, right? But even then, I want to know, because maybe somebody does come to me and say, hey, that's going to take 10 years. And I go, oh, shoot. Well, that's core to our game. I guess our game is going to take 10 years, or we better come up with a different idea. And so these, the estimation has a purpose. It's shared understanding. It's the ability to prioritize better. It does allow us to have some understanding. One of the ways I described some of the, whenever I'm working with a team, one of the early things I'll do, especially if it has a lot of work that it has a somewhat known, hey, I kind of know what I need to do around this. I'll immediately just do this giant exercise of kind of estimating and road mapping out everything. And the thing I'll tell everybody involved is, I know this is wrong, and it's probably really badly wrong. But just by putting it all down on paper, what I'm going to do now is track, for whatever time frame makes sense, a week, a day, a month, whatever. I'm going to track how far did we get. Okay, cool. We got, in 1 month of work, we got 2 days into our plan. Got it. That is really useful information now, right? Because what this tells me is this plan is horribly wrong, right? It's off and by an unknown amount, but seems to be wildly underestimating how much time this is actually going to take. Very, very valuable to know. And all I did was start with something that I knew was wrong and then tracked it against reality. And if you do something that simple, now you can start going like, oh, shoot, this is going to take way longer than we thought. Excellent, cool. And now you can start ahead of time having the conversations. Well, what are the least important things that we shouldn't be focusing on, that we shouldn't be thinking about? And the faster you can get to those points, the faster you can engage in the right conversations. Like you said, this is the stuff we're not going to do because other stuff matters more. Because this is everything is opportunity cost when it comes to this stuff. There's no game out there that couldn't have probably benefited in some major or minor way from an additional feature. But the best games in the world chose to finally ship with what they had because it worked together.
And by the way, the reason we tell you all this is because Ben and I have struggled a lot in our careers as teachers, guides, mentors, and leaders of teams with handing people the keys, i.e., and watching them drive the car right into the wall. So it's like, I can teach you estimation. I can teach you all the most effective estimation techniques that exist out there. We've literally studied this like students for years and employed almost every method you can think of. And 98% of the time we see people misuse these tools. So it's like, we have to spend this time helping you understand how to think about estimation first. And so again, the takeaway from all of this is to understand that estimation is a valuable thing, that it can be used correctly. It can become a boon to your teams, a thing that people are not cynical about, but you must respect the fact that it is downstream of things that are more important. And so, like, how are you treating the project? Are you treating it like you're building chairs on an assembly line? That is a problem. Your estimates will be bad. Are you treating it like a construction project? Is it all about a bunch of VPs who are just trying to squeeze a bunch of information out of the team and they don't really care or are willing to be flexible on anything? Like these are the things you need to keep in mind.
Aaron and I have seen this. Are you an executive producer or a dev director or a whatever title, head of studio or something, and you think that part of the point of your job is to have a plan? And so you have to have a plan. And the plan becomes the point rather than the assist to the vision of the game, right? Like this one is just over. It's like, oh no, but the plan's wrong. So we have to fix the plan because the plan's wrong. I'm like, well, the plan is always going to be wrong. Why would you think it was going to be right? Well, no. But if the plan's wrong, we need to replan. I'm like, well, I mean, we can update the plan. Like we should update the plan based on what we just learned. But like the plan, and it's, I have these conversations with people and it's like, no, we have to fix it. And I'm like, it was always broken. You can't make a non-broken plan for a 3-year game development project, much less, again, a 5-year or 7-year or whatever. And like you're in no other areas of life, or I guess I'll say incredibly few areas of life, are you able to accurately tell me what's going to be happening in 18 months? Like it's ridiculous. We all understand it is ridiculous. It's like, well, I'll probably be living where I'm living and I might still have this job and, blah, but there's so much in life that can change and that is uncertain and that shifts. And like, that's in everybody's life, all the time. So it's ridiculous that we think that we somehow can in game dev. And again, it's for all the reasons that we've talked about. I do want to say as well, there are, I think one of the biggest cynicisms that emerge from planning is because when we teach people how to estimate, or when I've seen other people do estimation, they're trying to do it sort of by the book. Let's say they're using some, like maybe the leads are breaking everything down by hours or days, or the team is all getting together to do poker planning with story points and turning everything into user story, whatever it is, right? These processes are incredibly expensive. And one thing I would say right out of the gate when I'm like talking to teams about this and studios about this is it doesn't have to actually be as expensive as you're making it. you're so obsessed with trying to do this by the book or in just the right way. It's almost freeing when you realize, like, don't worry, it's going to be wrong. It's okay that it's wrong. We're trying to get directional accuracy over a long period of time, and we'll learn more about that as we go. So don't worry that it's wrong right now. Don't don't take your entire team to an offsite for 2 weeks to try to break down every little task you think you need, because what I can guarantee you is, one, a lot of those numbers are wrong, and two, you missed a ton of stuff. And so instead, find ways to move faster when you're doing it, because then people will actually recognize it's wrong and then find ways to move faster when getting those estimates.
Well, also be aware of what levers you're willing to pull and actually pull them. Like the whole idea of flexibility and adaptability in a high uncertainty environment, like in game development, is about, again, like, can you pull the lever of scope? Can you pull the lever of time? Can you pull the lever of money and resources? Can you pull the lever of priority? Like you need those levers there, because the assumption going into it is that you are going to have stuff that comes up that you didn't expect. Certain things are going to take longer than you expected. You're going to learn things that you didn't know. Like, all of these things will 100% happen. And so those levers are how you still make the thing fit into the time you're trying to get it to fit into. So if you start yourself out from day one with no levers, or levers that you cannot pull, you're fucked already from day one. Like because things will come up, and the only lever you will have is work harder. And by the way, it shows that that's the situation we end up in most of the time in game development. So like, if, again, estimation important, we'll probably talk a little bit about some techniques you can use in a second, but if you want to be a savvy project manager, the first thing you should do is work with your stakeholders to figure out what levers exist and really hold them accountable. To be clear about what levers exist, what it means to pull them, how much each one of them can be pulled, and how you're going to keep them updated on what levers you're pulling. Because you will be doing more service for your team, and you will be giving yourself more of a fighting chance at success if you negotiate that up front. Trust me, that is worth 1,000 times more than like doing story points right, or using hours versus days, or whatever. That shit is all going to be wrong, I promise you, if you don't do this other part. We're going to make the assumption that most of these projects are not super defined projects, that like on the scale of planning, you're closer to sort of the innovative R&D side of the spectrum, if you will, than you are chairs on an assembly line. We're just going to make the majority of game development happens farther on that side of the scale. So that's where we talk about things like, ideal hours and ideal days has been this thing that a lot of people use, I think, as a way to still provide this security and certainty of hard numbers while claiming that they're still kind of playing in the relative space. That's why I don't like it. It's like, pick a side. You know what I mean? Like, it's actually important to pick a side. I hate ideal days and hours. I think
that's
they're
funny,
bullshit.
because I've used them. I've used them.
So have I.
And they can work. They can work.
I
agree
would
with
say
what
that
you're saying, which is,
yeah,
there's a high likelihood of confusion for all parties involved, because as you said, you're straddling. You're straddling two philosophies.
And the trap with all of this stuff is to mentally trick yourself and your team. And so you're making that harder on yourself by using that kind of stuff. Okay, that all being said, I think what we're talking about really here is relative estimation. So, Ben talks a lot about this in his estimation course that he has. And we're building one online right now that's going to be available in the future. But like, one of the things Ben talks about a lot, and then I'm going to kick this over to you to kind of go into more detail, is the idea of what it means to build layers of confidence interval in the understanding of your estimates, as opposed to, again, viewing it as this very strong line in the sand, this sort of definitive moment where it's like, and the number is 5.
Yeah. So one thing that's fascinating around this space, this all came out of this idea of like, what does it mean to actually be what a book, How to Measure Anything, called a calibrated estimator. And the idea behind this is you want to be accurate and not precise. And the problem is that most of the systems we build want you to be precise. And let me just talk about what those mean, because a lot of people think they're the same thing. Accuracy means what I said was true, like it came to pass. So, I predict that the sun will rise tomorrow. That'll be accurate. If you asked me exactly what time it was going to rise, I could tell you a precise number. I could say it's going to be 6:55. I don't know if that's true. I'm making a guess right now in some sense. Aaron, why don't you check actually? What time is the sun going to rise tomorrow in Denver? If you could just look that up real quick. But if I wanted to be accurate and I was still trying to give you the time that the sun was going to rise, if I had no clue, I could say like, I don't know, sometime in the morning.
5:39 a.m.
Okay, so I was off by a while. And that's the thing. I would have made some guess that was maybe something like 5 to 7, right? And well, you're like, well, but that's not a very precise range. You're correct. It's not. It's not precise range at all, but it's more likely to be accurate. And what's important for us is to be accurate when we're making these estimates. And a simple way this applies to leaders in game development is when you're thinking about when something's going to be done, someone might come up to you and say, hey, can you get that done in 3 months? And you're like, wait a minute, wrong question. The question is better stated. Well, there's 2 better ways to state that question. One is, what can you get done in 3 months? And then a different way to say it is, how long do you think that's going to take? And give me the confidence interval around it. And to that, I might respond, I don't know. But my estimate would be somewhere between 2 and 6 months. I think it's probably going to be between those 2 numbers. It's going to be somewhere between 2 and 6
Ben,
months.
you know what I think is so funny is people balk at that, right? Because I think there's something about our brains that just craves precision more than accuracy. But people balk at that. But like, imagine that you could know that 6 months in advance. That would be incredibly valuable to know. And then it begs the question, okay, well, what are the primary factors that differentiate 2 months from 6 months? Then you're asking questions that matter, right?
Because if you basically make me say, and by the way, our tendency as humans, most people are overconfident estimators, which means that if my actual confidence interval, let's say my 90% confidence interval was something like 2 to 6 months, if you just asked me for a precise number, I'd probably say something closer to 2 or 3 months than I would to 5 or 6. Most people do that. It's very natural. There's a bunch of reasons why I won't go into them right now. If, though, I give you that answer and I actually stop and I go, wait a minute, I could just say 3 months or 2.5 months, but the reality is I'm not sure. And actually, I think there's a decent chance it's longer than that. Okay, 2 to 6. Now you can ask the question, 2 to 6. Okay, we don't have the outer side of that. What could we do to help it come in closer to 2 or 3 and further away from 6? And now we're starting to have a conversation on, okay, this is an important thing, but we don't want to spend 6 months on it. Now we can start, again, doing that scoping conversation. We can say, like, well, what can we pull out of this? Okay, what is the support we could give you from other teams? What are the various ways that would help you change your confidence interval for it to be less? And again, this is called estimation calibration. It's recognizing that when you're asked for a confidence interval, a lot of us are like, oh, give us a confidence interval. And people will be like 80%. And then they'll give like a date. And I'm like, no, you just gave like half of a 60% confidence interval or something. Like you're not actually giving the number you think you're giving. Confidence intervals involve ranges. That's how they function, right? What's the wingspan of a 747? I don't remember exactly. I like... probably longer than 50 feet. Pretty sure it's way longer than 50 feet. But might be a football field, actually. I'd probably say something like 50 to 400 feet, honestly. If you were asking me for like a 90% confidence interval on the wingspan of a 747. And I'm worried I'm shorting it, actually, that it's longer than that. But that would be like
224 feet.
224. Okay, cool. So it's in my range, right? Okay. So, and this is the thing. If you'd asked me like how long is wingspan and I had to give you one number, I would be precise and I would probably be wrong. I wasn't probably not going to say 224 feet. But you're thinking about that, and there are techniques you can use to help you think about that. And as leaders, especially, this is on us when we're asked questions about things to not just go to the first number that jumps to our mind, because most people are overconfident estimators, and we get our team in trouble when we say 2 months. When if we actually stopped and thought about it, it was like, well, actually, like 2 to 6 months.
Also, one of the things too is like how long it takes to do the estimates is a factor as well. Like one of the reasons we push people towards like relative and like confidence intervals and stuff is like when you have that range, there's a comfort there. And also your brain, I think, more intuitively understands that idea. And so you can move through them much more quickly. And so again, I think we're so nervous about the fact that feels lower efficacy. But the irony is that it's actually higher efficacy and you can blow through them faster. And by the way, too, once your team starts blowing through these fast enough and doing the other thing, like I said, which is reflecting on previous estimates to see how accurate they were. So there's actually a learning loop of estimation accuracy. I think like over time, you can get to a place where you can sit down with your stakeholders. You can say, hey, this is going to happen between 3 and 6 months. And here are the factors, here are the levers that we as leaders can help pull to ensure that it's on the lower end than the higher end. You've got now your whole leadership team mobilized on making decisions that matter to help the team succeed. And you've got the team like unburdened by a lot of the very, very grueling work that's typically associated with like really deep estimates. Like, I mean, I've seen project managers pull like 30 people into a room and just have these engineers slaving over like, well, how many hours is this? And now this task, and how many hours is that? And just spending days or weeks even on estimating. And what's even worse is then when the thing is fucking wrong 4 months from now, then we have to go back and do it all again. And so then we do it all again and do it all again, to the point where I've seen like within a year, I've seen certain projects spend maybe 3 to 4 months just planning. And it's a nightmare. You know what I mean?
It would be comical if it wasn't so painful, right? And just so negative. So one thing I'll say too around like a lot of those numbers, one of the things that if you're tracking this stuff over time, as Aaron was saying, and you're watching what your team is doing, I remember having a really cool conversation with one of my teams. They tended to consistently overestimate by about 4x what they would get done. And I just tracked it over time. It was like they were running on weekly sprints. It was an environment art team. And I got like, I can't remember, 6-8 weeks in to a very long project. And I showed them the data. I said, hey, every time you guys say that we're going to get 400 units of work done, and we average getting 100 units of work done. And it was weird because I don't know if any of them had ever had somebody just like do that to them. Be like, hey, here's what we say is going to happen and here's what actually happens, right? And by the way, the only number I cared about when I was doing forward projection was what actually happened. I did not care about their projections past like the first 2 weeks. After that, I was like, nope, I'm going with the data of how much we actually get done. Because everybody kept telling me like, no, we're going to go faster. Oh, we're just figuring stuff out. No, we're just learning the systems. It's okay. We're going to go faster. We're going to go faster. And I'm like, you know what? I generally do not believe you will go faster later. I know everybody wants to. I know everybody thinks they will. But there's enough other stuff that's going to happen to make you slower that you might as well just call it neutral and say we're probably going to keep moving at the rate we're moving, or if anything, go slower. And so reflecting that to the team, that they were estimating, again, 400 units of work and we were getting 100 done, was the one thing that, and I really appreciate this about that team, they looked at it and they were like, okay. And I told them too, I am so happy for you to prove me wrong this next week. Like that you take this next week and you crush it and you get 400 units done. But what I would like us to start doing is actually saying, we seem to get about 100 done. Let's see what are the most important 100 units of work to do. And when we did that, suddenly we started being much closer and it started helping a ton. So that's one thing. So, okay, so we talked about estimation calibration. Another one I'm going to mention real quick. I've used this method I think a couple of times, and it's just throughput. And throughput's really interesting because everybody's like, well, that's not going to be very accurate. And for me, I always say, oh, as opposed to whatever you're doing. And so what throughput is it just takes any ticket, right? Whether you call it a story or a task or however whatever it is that you're putting through your team, and it gives every single one of those things a value of 1. Regardless of how big or small you think it does, I don't care. I just treat it all the same. And we might still estimate. Estimation still has some value internal to the team around understanding the work. But, and I had a team actually where they chose to estimate it even though I wasn't using the estimates. And I was really upfront. I was like, I'm not using the estimates. They're like, I know, but it's helpful for us to understand what we're doing. I just tracked throughput. And throughput over time meant that like whenever anything got fully done, it basically counts as like 1 point, right? And so, or 1 unit of work got done, right? And so one task gets done. Then I'll go and I look into like how many total tasks do we think we need to do? And in a long enough project, this is actually shockingly accurate. Like you would be stunned at how accurate this can be over long periods of time at actually predicting how much work a team is getting done. even when your numbers are very low, and even when you're like, but there's such a high variance, like this thing only took a day and that thing took 6 weeks. And like, I'm like, yep, I know. And guess what? Over a long enough period of time, it averages out. And I actually have reasonable predictability over this whole system. And there's other stuff I can start tracking, like how much work do we tend to create in an ongoing way, and I can factor that in. And there's you can get more complex with it. But even if you just go to Throughput and you start measuring tasks completed on a team, and then you try to make a more and more over time educated guess on how many total tasks are left to do, that is actually going to be a better predictor of when your team or whatever it is that you're leading and trying to estimate is going to be done than just about anything else. There's a bunch of other techniques. There's things like blink estimation. Aaron mentioned ideal days. You can use hours and days. You can use like story points. We've kind of alluded to that a few times. There's sort of the hashtag no estimates group. There's cycle time. There's a million different techniques. We'll be talking about them in other contexts. But for now, I just wanted to give you that. Like, hey, Throughput is something. If you're not sure where to start, it's simple and it's really fast. And it gives you more. And by the way, another really cool thing I'll say about it, you can immediately look, if you have any record at all in like Favreau or Jira or whatever, you can look behind you and you can see like, well, what did we get done how many things did we get done last week? Okay, the week before that. Okay, the week before that. Okay, the week before that. And you just count everything that got done as a 1. And, 1 unit of work got done. And now you actually have already got some historical thing, even though you didn't estimate any of that work potentially. So Throughput has this useful thing where if your team's been running for a while, you can start getting an understanding of like likely forward progress. It's not perfect. No estimation is. Estimates by their definition, they're not prophecy. They're not precise. They're intended to be accurate, and it can give you an accurate understanding of when you might be done. So anyway, there you go. There's some tools for you.
Yeah, I think, as we're wrapping up estimation, just a couple of things to keep in mind. Remember, so many of the upstream things matter more than estimation, in the sense that they're going to have a higher impact on the outcome of your planning and your estimation than the actual exercise of estimation itself. So make sure that you're on the same page with your stakeholders. Make sure that it's not just this hyper-defined fixed scope thing that's being pushed down the pipeline, because if that is the case, it doesn't even matter what your estimates are. You're on rails anyway, and your estimates are likely to be a distraction or completely wrong. So understand what levers you need to be able to pull. Negotiate with your stakeholders, with leadership, to be able to pull those levers and explain what it looks like to pull those levers. And also make sure to keep an eye out for negative behaviors and incentives around estimation, right? Like, as a leader, you need to be like proactively solving the social problems around estimation as well as the technical problems. And then finally, Ben laid out a couple of specific methods and frameworks you can use to estimate more accurately. And a lot of times it's focusing more on accuracy than precision, which precision can be a trap a lot of the time. So those are the things off the top of my head to take away from this.
Aaron, you hit this hardest in this episode. Our industry needs to stop pretending studios are factories with high degrees of certainty around the work and outcomes. It's helping nobody. It's burning people out. And then the other thing is, there are ways to estimate that are not super expensive and are very helpful in getting you to a baseline of predictability, if that's what you're going for. So if you're that person spending weeks fiddling around with hours and points and whatever, you probably don't need to be answering the problem that you're facing. So there you go. Did you enjoy this episode? If you did and are looking for more conversations like this one, join the Building Better Games Discord community. It's for leaders and producers in game dev who are frustrated with solving the wrong problems and who want to share experiences and learn how to lead and build better games. Check out the show notes to join. I'll see you there.